What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here, and today we are going to discuss the end of the Spark of Rebellion meta and what the game's first set looked like in terms of meta and what decks were popular, what was successful, and then we're going to discuss how things might evolve going forward. We're also going to take a little moment to discuss the only rules change we've seen in this first set and what that might do for the game as a whole. So let's dig into it. So let's look at the tier list that I had at around the launch of the game. This is the tier list image that I had. And as you can see, in the A tier, I had Boba, Sabine, Leia, and Iden. Bunch of things in the B tier, bunch of things in the C tier, and good old IG-88 in the D tier. So this is what I was thinking in the game's launch, and I have to say some things have changed. Now, some things have not changed. So I think that Boba and Sabine are still right up there, but some of these others I would be moving around. So what we're gonna do now is I'm going to take this list and update it with what I think we're looking at as the Spark of Rebellion meta comes to a close. So let's take a look over here. I have the chart, and so yeah, Boba. I think Boba gets to stay up here. I think he is one of the strongest leaders in the game. I wouldn't put him up here in the S tier. So for me, S tier is like broken. S tier is like if you're not playing this, you're wrong. And Boba is not in that tier. He's very good, but he's not at the level where there's no reason to play any other deck. We've seen a ton of other decks winning events. Boba has been quite successful, but he is not the be all end all. Leia here, I'm actually going to demote. The problem with Leia is that Sabine does basically the same deck except better. So Sabine is also going to be in the A tier. She is the most successful leader after Boba Fett. She's actually better than Boba Fett on some metrics, but hasn't had quite as good results in tournaments. And she is sort of the premier aggro leader in the game. Leia is also doing an aggro strategy, doesn't execute it quite as well as Sabine, and is going to be bumped down here. I think I'll probably put her. It's controversial. It's really the B or the C tier here for Leia. The thing about Leia is I don't think there's a huge reason to run the deck, but it isn't like it still gets wins against other leaders and stuff. It's just it feels to me like Sabine does it better. We're gonna put Leia in the B tier. Iden actually does get to stay up here in the A tier. Iden is a very successful control leader. She is not the only control leader. We've seen the control meta really diversifying since the game came out, but I think Iden is a strong A tier leader up here. And I'm actually going to promote our man, Director Krennic, up here as well. So Krennic has been a leader that people have begun using more recently as a counter to Boba. Um, and I think that Krennic's an interesting leader where he is similar to Iden, where he's often going to play sort of a control game plan, but he's a little more oriented towards the more mid-rangey style of control rather than the harder control builds that Iden has been tending towards more recently. Iden often plays double blue, or we've seen Iden red a lot in the early days, whereas I think Krennic green is really where he does best. And Iden isn't quite as effective at using the green cards, in my opinion, compared to Krennic. But these two are both strong. We also have control is not just these leaders. I think that we've also seen like Vader control. I'm not going to put Vader control up into the A tier at this time, but I think it's a solid B tier deck where it has had some good results in certain environments. It is. I don't think it's necessarily the greatest, but it is. It definitely has has options and has had some good results. So the B tier, or the like tier 1.5 as we sometimes call it, these are going to be leaders that have had some good results in certain events and seem like they have a solid game plan that they're going for, but are not quite performing at the same level as the A tier leaders. So Luke's going to stay here. Han is going to stay here. Luke and Han, both running green, have had a good amount of success in events. We're going to have Vader here as discussed. Chirrut's going to be here. Grand Inquisitor is going to get demoted, but be prepared for him to rise in the Shadows of the Galaxy meta, I think, because there are a bunch of new cards that seem like they combo well with him. Leia is going to be here as discussed, and we're actually going to bump up Palpatine and actually Tarkin. So Palpatine has had some success with various builds. The main problem with him is that he is a very, very late game oriented leader, and he has real difficulty overwhelming some of the aggro stuff. He's very control, but if you get there, he can be really impactful. Tarkin, I think, is underrated, but has had some good results. Isn't seeing a ton of play, and this is maybe my most controversial pick, elevating Tarkin up here. Um, but I think it is correct. So I'm gonna have Tarkin up in the B tier as a leader that is solid, but not quite putting out wins at the other levels, but definitely has some nice tricks to him. You know, there are a few cards that become really strong with Tarkin. So if you're playing Tarkin yellow, for instance, ISB agent is crazy. The normal TIE LN Starfighter is really good with Tarkin and not very good with most other leaders. So Tarkin's going to be here in the B tier. In the C tier, yeah, Thrawn stays here. Hera is actually getting demoted to D tier. Um, I wanted Hera to be good. A lot of people wanted Hera to be good. I think there was some information about a ton of people deck building with Hera and so on, and it's not turning up. The double green cards are weak compared to the other double aspect cards. There isn't quite enough Spectre stuff for her to be good, and those base stats are just really bad for a leader that doesn't have an ability. Um, or that doesn't have a like active ability. So Hera is going to be bumped down to the D tier for me. Um, Cassian's going to stay here in the C tier. Jin is going to stay here in the C tier. Some people would probably bump Jin down to the D tier, but I actually played a bunch of games with Jin, and I think she is not. I don't think she's on the level of Hera or IG-88. Jin feels much more like a real leader to me than those two. She is probably overshadowed by Han a bit, but she has some strengths to her. And also, this is a good occasion to note that this is for premier constructed play where I'm doing this tier list. It is not for draft. Jin is arguably actually the best leader in draft, or up there at least. I would put Boba on a similar tier, and we could discuss some of the other leaders as well as certain leaders being great if you have a pool for them. But this is for premier, and in premier, Jin is unfortunately not quite getting it done. Grand Inquisitor combos just aren't really coming off at the level that we want. Chewy, kind of slow, and it seems like the villainy side of things is doing a lot better for these control decks. So he hasn't been doing all that well, but again, not at this bottom level. And Cassian also, um, card draw just isn't as important in this game as some other games, and there hasn't yet been a great implementation of Cassian, in my opinion. Though, I've seen some discussion of, oh, maybe you have like a bounty focused deck that uses Cassian to redraw stuff after you're playing the bounty cards and so on. So, we'll see what happens in the future. But right now, Cassian's going to be in the C tier. D tier, Hera, we already discussed, and then IG-88. IG-88 is desperately in need of a fifth hit point or something because he just gets killed. He really has trouble putting together a good aggro plan. It's not unwinnable. There is an argument that I should actually put IG-88 in the C tier also, but like the main problem that I have with IG-88 is the 4 HP makes him really vulnerable. His ability requires you to outnumber your opponent, which is something that does not reliably happen. And additionally, I feel like I have seen IG-88 decks that have done well. Um, I had a game against someone who was playing an IG-88 yellow, and they actually beat me. I thought it was a cool deck, but I remember saying like, now wait a minute, would this be better if you just switched it to Boba Red? And if I recall correctly, the guy was like, "Yeah, probably." Which, like, I totally sympathize with wanting to play a weird leader. I took Jin to a Store Showdown at one point, but right now I don't think there's a really solid reason to play IG-88. That could change in the future. Maybe we're going to see some droid synergy. Maybe we're going to see cards that create token units or something in set 3. IG-88 with an army of B1 battle droids or something, making that outnumber work more reliably could be strong. But at least for right now, IG-88 is going to be in the D tier here. Unfortunately, if you're an IG-88 fan, I'm sorry. I do think it's a cool concept, but it's just not quite there at this time. So this would be my updated tier list. So definitely there's been some movement since the first one. Boba and Sabine, which I think people had early on identified as really strong, kind of stayed strong, but the strongest versions of those shifted. So I think that at the start, Boba Green was like the deck to beat that everyone was afraid of. Boba Yellow has been doing better than Boba Green more recently. Similarly, Sabine Green was a big deal, and Sabine Yellow is now, in my opinion, a stronger deck. And if you want to fight control, I would go for Sabine double red. Now that's about to change again because we're about to get the Shadows of the Galaxy cards, and they could easily change this up. But it's been interesting. And the other thing that I would say is that if you consider the top tier and the tier 1.5 to be the things that you would be like reasonable to take to a tournament, and like with that you were actually like trying to compete at, the top tier and the tier 1.5 is like most of the leaders in the game. Like it's actually very good. Not all games have this or anything close to this, and I'm actually really positively impressed with how balanced this game is, given that they printed 18 liters. I was definitely not expecting 18 liters when I was first hearing information about this game, and they have managed to make a remarkably balanced setting, even with a large number of characters to choose from. So I think that's really cool. Okay, so moving on from the tier list, let's go ahead and get back to the overall meta summary. So Sabine and Boba, probably the top two leaders in the game. Control is kind of splitting the vote, so to speak, between a bunch of different leaders. So Krennic, Iden, Tarkin, Palpatine sometimes. Many of those are capable of putting a strong performance up, but there isn't a clear winner, which I think actually is indicative of some good balance there. Like right now, I think it's relatively clear that Sabine has won over Leia when it comes to like which one is the more popular and more successful aggro leader. But for Control, it's much more up in the air. As I mentioned, there's a strong roster of B tier or tier 1.5 decks. Overall, the meta feels really open and interesting. IG88 and Hera are suffering, but even still, I think for a first set, this is really solid overall balance in meta. Are there some things that I would change? Sure. So, like Boba Fett collecting the bounty, the leader card, I would probably knock him down to 4/6 or 3/7 or even 3/6, or I would make him deploy on 6 resources. I think the game would be almost certainly more balanced if that were the case. But even though I think Boba Fett's leader card is very, very strong, it has not resulted in Boba Fett, the deck, being totally dominant. Is it a good deck? Absolutely yes. It's a very successful deck, but it is not a like this is taking over the game. If you're not playing this, you're wrong type deck. And yeah. So I'm now going to look at some data here. Oh yeah, and there's poor IG88. So that 4 HP is just not where you want to be. And for Hera, they're just Hera could get better. We might see some more specters. It could happen. I don't know that it's going to happen, but there's some potential there, and the Hera dream I think is alive for many players. I kind of wonder if Hera is going to be similar to Azalea from Flesh and Blood. So Azalea was a character who was extremely weak when first released, and a lot of people thought the character was very cool because she had interesting and unique mechanics, and like the theme was like a ranger shooting arrows and stuff. And people were like, oh, that's very cool. But at the same time, she was really bad. And eventually they did print enough support for Ranger and for her concept that she actually became at least like fairly credible as a hero. So I think that Hera could see similar stuff. You know, maybe we see Blind Keenan, maybe we see Spectre Ahsoka, we see like other Spectre cards, Sabine's TIE Fighter, that little shuttle that launches out of the back of the Ghost or whatever. There's definitely the potential for more Spectre cards. And if we see good Spectre cards in a future set, maybe Hera will make a comeback. We'll have to see. But yeah, these things are hard to assess. I'm kind of hoping she does at some point. But it's hard to say what'll happen. Okay, so now we're going to look at some data. So this information was compiled by Cody Cressman, and big shout out to Cody for putting this all together. This was something where it was just community submitted results from Store Showdown events, and he gathered the results of 200 Store Showdowns to create this data. So these are the overall results, not separated by bases or whatever, just leaders. As we can see, we have two leaders are really performing at the top of the pack, and that is Boba number 1 and Sabine number 2. Once we start getting into some of the other stuff, Han is actually number 3, and then various control decks. Or I'm sorry, I said Han is number 3. Iden actually did better than Han in this data. I think I was looking at the wrong thing, so my apologies for the error. But number 3 was Iden, number 4 was Han, and then various control decks, I believe. Or maybe Vader and Han are tied. I don't have the precise numbers. I just have these graphs. So yeah. But So Chirrut, Luke, Han did pretty well despite being in that sort of tier 1.5. Krennic didn't actually do as well in these showdowns, but a lot of them were played before Krennic became popular. So more recently, we've been seeing people playing Krennic to adapt to some of these Boba decks. And there were actually only 3 leaders that did not win any Store Showdown in this data set, and that was Hera, Jyn, and IG-88. Even Chewie did have a win. Cassian had a win. We had some stuff there. So, uh, like I was saying, overall, there are some Sabine and Boba are definitely doing very well, but other leaders are in it as well. And only a few leaders had a really poor showing. And even some of the ones that I would say are maybe in the C tier, not that good, did have at least one event win. So, yeah, now we're going to look at the more detailed breakdown. This is the full breakdown of the showdown results. So this one is going to look at the uh, full data that's not just the leader, but the leader and base combination. And there's actually going to be 2 pages of this because there are so many combinations. But as we can see, Boba Yellow 30 HP base was the most successful leader in this page, and indeed for the thing as a whole. Boba Energy Conversion Lab, which was the deck that everybody was concerned about when the game was coming out, did well, but did not do as well as Boba Yellow. There are different styles of deck between those two. So Boba Yellow is more of like a tempo or like an aggro tempo type deck, whereas ECL Boba Green is more of a mid range deck. And the aggro tempo style, I would say, is beneficial in when it's time to play against aggro. So as a Sabine player, I think that my odds of beating Boba Green are a lot higher than against Boba Yellow. I think I'm pretty advantaged into most Boba Greens, and against Boba Yellow, it's a much harder matchup. Not an unwinnable matchup, especially for Sabine Yellow. I think the rise of Boba Yellow is part of why I would consider Sabine Yellow to be the best Sabine right now. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see how things evolve further. The best Iden, interestingly, was actually Iden double blue, at least in terms of making people into the event as a whole. But the Iden Energy, I'm sorry, making the top cut as a whole. But Iden Energy Conversion Lab did have more wins. So it kind of depends on what you weight here. Some people might weight making the top cut more than the actual event win. Some people might weight the event win more than the top cut. As a rule of thumb, so the green bar is your wins, the yellow bar is your finalists, and the red bar is your top fours. At least in principle, if a deck was like perfectly balanced, we would expect the win rate to be 1/4 of the total bar, because the amount of wins would be 1 in 4 compared to finalists and top fours. If you have more than that, that means that the deck is maybe performing better than expected, even in the top cut, as we see, I believe, with Boba Yellow there, though I don't have, I don't have really precise numbers. Um, but I believe that we're looking at somewhat more than a fourth of the graph there for the wins. And then, yeah, similarly, I think we might say a similar thing about Han Green. So now we're going to look at the next page. Oh, and before I do that, shout out to Cherry Tarkentown, who had a pretty strong performance there. Another one of those kind of tier 1.5 type decks. And it's interesting to note that some leaders did well on a range of bases. So like Iden here had like wins on ECL, on Tarkentown, on Iden Blue, on Iden Green, on Iden Red, 30 HP, and on Iden Yellow, 30 HP. And others like Chirrut basically only had results on Tarkentown and 30 HP Red, which are quite similar decks, and Tarkentown did way better. So, interesting to see some of them being more flexible than less flexible. Here we have page 2. Now, I want to just be very clear. The x-axis label on this graph is different. It is not the same as the one on the previous graph. So Sabine ECL here did not overperform Boba Yellow. I know it looks like it if we switch back between these. You can see that the Sabine ECL graph is longer, but that is not representative of that's not representative of actually being better than Boba Yellow. It's representative of the graphs being on with different axis labels here. So Sabine Yellow, in my opinion, was the best one here, and that is you did get fewer results in the top group, but Sabine Yellow had actually a higher number as well as a higher proportion of wins compared to Sabine ECL, and I do think that the Yellow Sabine is better positioned in the current situation. Hard to say, but the there's some cool stuff there. Luke Green was actually pretty successful on here with a 30 HP base. And Han Green was also using the 30 HP base. It's kind of funny because people were talking about, oh, ECL is the best card in the game. ECL is broken. But these decks have been quite successful not using ECL. And in fact, Luke ECL did worse. Now, there is a major confounding factor, which is that popular versions of there's a popular version of Han Green, at least, that was popularized by Thork. And that version was running the 30 HP base. It's possible that if Thork had instead popularized ECL, we would see that be more popular. There is kind of this tendency for people to copy popular decks, at least as the baseline. So it's possible that if something becomes popular, it will end up having many more results on here, even if it was overall weaker, which I'm not saying for sure. I'm not an expert on Han. I personally find giving up ECL to be a struggle, but maybe that's what you need to get the extra room against aggro, and buy yourself time to get to those reinforcement walkers. Okay, so range of Palpatine builds. So, like I was saying earlier, some leaders did well with a range of builds, and Palpatine was one of them. Amusingly, all of the successful Palpatine builds were on 30 HP bases, but we had wins for all four colors of 30 HP base with Palpatine. Vader was doing okay. So Vader ECL, which was another deck that was very strong early on when people were playing before with previewed cards before the game came out, didn't actually do as well as Vader Blue. And Vader Green 30 HP actually had a lot more top cut placement or top four placements, even if it didn't have as many wins as Vader ECL. So interesting stuff there. Krennic ECL did very well. Krennic didn't do anywhere near as well on the other bases that he was tried with. Leia Red 30 HP and Leia Red Tarkentown both did decently, but I do think they're really kind of second tier aggro decks compared to Sabine. And then we saw, we saw the Luke Green 30 HP that I was discussing earlier. And, it's interesting to take a look at this. And it is interesting to note that almost everybody has at least something. I also know that if I recall correctly, this has 200 events. It does not have every event. I think there have been event wins with Tarkin Yellow. But we'll have to delve into that at another time. Big shout out again to Cody Cressman for this data. And I think it's interesting to take a look at this stuff and see how things are doing. Once again, Sabine and Boba are clear kind of front runners, but a lot of other builds are still getting results as well. And many of these games were played before the more recent updates and meta and so on that have caused people to be teching in with the Krennic ECL builds. So I think Krennic would be. I think if we had these events taking place this month instead of over the last 2 months, I think Krennic would do significantly better than he did this time around. But, I could be wrong. Shout out again to Cody Cressman, and let's move on. So Boba did very well. Double Yellow Boba was the most successful deck of the season, but we've seen things that are evolving further to counter it. So Krennic Green is popular in large part for its Boba matchup. Boba can suffer against control builds, and we're seeing kind of a shift towards that. So I think that compared to Sabine, Boba is stronger in kind of an aggro mirror or like aggro against aggro tempo, where Boba can potentially exhaust or bounce stuff to get a bunch of time. His disruption can be really relevant if in a racing type scenario. Again, not unwinnable for the opponent. There's definitely some stuff they can do, but Boba feels like he has a significant advantage against Sabine, for instance. But Sabine feels like she's in a better place against some of the control decks that Boba can struggle with. So there are reasons to play both of those decks. And yeah, I'm going to be excited to see what happens next as we move into the Shadows of the Galaxy meta. I know that Boba Yellow and Sabine Green have both gotten some strong new cards, and it'll be cool to see whether or not those decks are going to stay very competitive, or whether maybe some new Shadows of the Galaxy leaders are going to displace them, or what. Should be a fun time. So there has been one rules change at the end of the season. Now, I don't think it was intended as a balance change, but basically leaders now count as entering play when they deploy and leaving play when they're defeated. Previously, there was a ruling that leaders were already in play. They were just in play on their leader side. So a leader did not interplay when it deployed. And this was confusing to many people. It wasn't intuitive with how people understood the game. So they changed it to be the other way around. Now, leaders do count as entering play when they deploy, and they count as leaving play when they are defeated and go back to being a leader. The main impact of this change is that it's a nerf to one Boba and a buff to another one. In particular, Boba Fett Disintegrator, aka Boba Unit, no longer gets his on attack ability against leaders that just deployed. So before this change, Boba was very threatening to leaders that had just deployed because they did not count as having entered play this round. So if they deployed and attacked, he could hit them for the bonus 3 damage. And you could see stuff like, Leia deploys and swings, the opponent ECLs in Boba Disintegrator, hits her for 6, takes her off the field immediately. And it could be really, really quite harsh. However, the other side of it is that Boba Fett collecting the bounty, who allows you to ready some resources after an opposing unit leaves play, does now trigger on leaders being defeated. Previously, it didn't count because the leader was not leaving play. It was still in play just as a leader instead of a leader unit. But now it does trigger on that. I'm not actually sure how this is going to shift balance as a whole. If your deck was struggling with Boba Fett, the unit, taking out your leader early on in the game, I think this is going to be a very positive change. So, for instance, Sabine or Leia, I think sometimes had issues with that, and now get to avoid it. But on the other hand, I've definitely also had situations where my opponent was unable to get resources back because the only unit they had defeated was a leader. And now Boba is going to be able to get resources in those scenarios. So will this strengthen or weaken the Boba Fett decks as a whole? Hard to say, but we'll have to see. Um, so yeah, what does the future hold? Shadows of the Galaxy pre-releases, they're going to be this weekend. In fact, the first ones are, I believe, going to be in, I don't know, some hours now. I'm recording this early on Friday morning, and I have a Friday pre-release to go to in the evening, so should be fun. And as with any new release, it's going to take a while for a meta to settle. Not everything is going to be understood at first. There's going to be a lot of testing and development. I'm really excited to see what people come up with the new leaders. If you're interested in pre-releases, I wrote a guide that goes over everything from how to find an event to the pre-release format, deck building, what the different leaders do, my recommendations there, gameplay tips. It's over at the Fifth Trooper blog, and I'm going to link it in the video description below. So check that out if you want some guidance for your pre-releases this weekend. And yeah, I'd be interested to hear from you in the comments. Which of the new leaders are you most excited to play with? I personally think Han Solo worth the risk. Looks pretty cool. Kind of a built-in ramp in exchange for some damage. I'm excited to, maybe try him in various sorts of compositions. But yeah, so best of luck to you who are going out and playing in pre-releases this weekend. And last but not least, there are going to be some new features for the channel coming soon with Shadows of the Galaxy. So stay tuned for that. I am excited to see what the future holds for this channel, but also for the game as a whole. I think it's been a really fun game in the first set. Set 2 looks cool as well. And yeah, we'll have to see how things go. That's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks to y'all for watching. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like. If you didn't like this video, feel free to leave a dislike. I do look at that stuff. And yeah, thanks again, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.